Dying grandfather tried to apologize after abandoning me for 20 years, but my brother chose them over me, not clickbait siblings broken. Hey everyone, this is probably going to be the hardest video I've ever made, but I need to get this story out there. Maybe some of you will understand what I've been through, or maybe you'll think I'm the villain in all this. Either way, I can't keep carrying this pain alone anymore. My name is Sarah, and this is the story of how my own family abandoned me when I needed them most, and how my brother, the one person I thought would always have my back, chose them over me when it mattered most. When everything changed. I was 8 years old when my world completely fell apart. My parents died in a car accident on a rainy Tuesday night in October. One moment, I was a normal kid complaining about homework and fighting with my 10-year-old brother Jake over the TV remote, and the next moment, I was an orphan. I still remember that night clearly. Jake and I were staying at our neighbor Mrs. Patterson's house because Mom and Dad had gone to some work event. Around midnight, there was this knock on the door that woke us both up. Through the thin walls, I could hear hushed, urgent voices, and then Mrs. Patterson started crying. She came into the living room where Jake and I were huddled together on the couch, both of us sensing that something terrible had happened, but not understanding what. "Kids," she said, her voice shaking, "I need to tell you something very important about your mommy and daddy." The next few days were a blur of funeral preparations, casseroles from neighbors, and adults speaking in whispers around us. Jake and I clung to each other through it all. He was my big brother, my protector, and even though he was only 10, he tried so hard to be strong for me. "We'll stick together, Sarah," he whispered to me the night before the funeral as we shared the guest bed at Mrs. Patterson's house. "No matter what happens, it'll be you and me, okay?" I believed him. At 8 years old, with my whole world shattered, Jake was the only constant I had left. The choice that broke everything. After the funeral, there was this big family meeting at our house. Our maternal grandparents, Grandma Rose and Grandpa Frank, had driven down from 2 states away. I barely knew them. We'd maybe seen them 3 times in my entire life, usually at Christmas or major holidays. Mom had always said they were difficult people and limited our contact with them. I remember sitting in our living room, which still smelled like Mom's vanilla candles, while these adults discussed our future like we weren't even there. Jake sat next to me, holding my hand tightly. "The children need stability," Grandma Rose was saying. "Frank and I have discussed this extensively, and we're prepared to take them in." For a moment, I felt this surge of relief. We would stay together. Jake and I would go live with our grandparents, and maybe things would be okay. But then Grandpa Frank cleared his throat. "Actually, Rose, we've talked about this. We're getting older, and 2 children would be overwhelming. Plus, girls are just more complicated to raise, especially at Sarah's age. All those emotional phases and teenage drama to come." My stomach dropped. Even at 8, I could sense where this was going. "We think it would be best if we took Jake," Grandma Rose continued, not even looking at me. "He's older, more independent. Boys are just easier to manage." The social worker, a tired-looking woman with kind eyes, leaned forward. "And what about Sarah?" There was this long, horrible pause. Jake's hand tightened around mine. "There are excellent foster families in the system," Grandpa Frank said dismissively. "She'll be fine. Young children adapt quickly." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. These people, my own grandparents, were sitting in my parents' living room discussing splitting up me and Jake like we were furniture. They were deciding how to divide. "No!" Jake suddenly shouted, jumping up from the couch. "Sarah and I stay together. I won't go anywhere without her." Grandma Rose's expression hardened. "Jacob, you're being dramatic. This is what's best for everyone." "It's not what's best for Sarah," Jake protested, his voice cracking. I started crying then. big, ugly sobs that I couldn't control. Everything was falling apart, and the adults in the room were just watching it happen. The social worker tried to advocate for keeping us together, but my grandparents were adamant. They would take Jake, or they wouldn't take either of us. And since they were family, they had priority over foster care for at least one of us. The day they took my brother. A week later, Jake left with our grandparents. I'll never forget standing on Mrs. Patterson's front porch, watching him load his suitcase into their car. He was crying, which made me cry harder. "I'll come back for you," he promised, hugging me so tight I could barely breathe. "As soon as I'm old enough, I'll come back and we'll be together again." "Promise?" I whispered. "I promise, Sarah. I'll never forget you." But as their car pulled away, taking my brother, my only family, with them, I had this sinking feeling that I might never see him again. I was right to be afraid. Life in foster care. The next 12 years of my life were a revolving door of foster homes, social workers, and temporary families. Some were kind, some were indifferent, and some were terrible. I learned to pack my belongings in garbage bags because cardboard suitcases were too optimistic. They implied you might be staying somewhere long enough to unpack. I thought about Jake constantly. For the first few years, I wrote him letters that the social workers promised to forward. I never got responses, but I kept writing anyway, telling him about my different schools, my foster families, my dreams of us being reunited. When I turned 12 and got my first cell phone, a hand-me-down from one of my foster families, I tried to find him on social media. I found a few profiles that might have been him, but none of them responded to my messages. As I got older, I started to wonder if he'd forgotten about me. Maybe his new life with our grandparents was so good that he didn't want to remember his little sister stuck in the foster system. The thought broke my heart, but I couldn't blame him. Who would want to remember something so painful? Making it on my own. I aged out of foster care at 18 with nothing but a garbage bag of clothes, a few $100s in savings, and a determination to never depend on anyone ever again. I worked multiple jobs while going to community college, then transferred to a state university on financial aid and scholarships. I studied social work, probably because I wanted to help kids like me, kids who fell through the cracks of families that were supposed to care for them. I graduated with honors, got a job with Child Protective Services, and slowly built a life for myself. It wasn't easy. I struggled with trust issues, abandonment fears, and this persistent feeling that I wasn't worth fighting for. But I was surviving, and in some ways, thriving. I still thought about Jake, especially on our birthdays or holidays. I'd created this fantasy in my head that maybe he'd been looking for me too, but couldn't find me because I'd moved around so much. Maybe he was out there somewhere, thinking about his little sister and wondering if I was okay. I held on to that hope for 20 years. The phone call that changed everything. Last month, I got a phone call that shattered the fragile peace I'd built for myself. "Is this Sarah Mitchell?" the voice asked. It was a woman, older, with a slight tremor in her speech. "Yes, who is this?" This is, this is your grandmother. Rose, your grandfather is very sick and he wants to see you." I literally dropped my phone. After 20 years of complete silence, my grandmother was calling me because her husband was dying and suddenly wanted to make amends. "Sarah, are you there?" I picked up the phone with shaking hands. "Why now?" I managed to ask. "Frank has pancreatic cancer," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "The doctors say he has maybe a few weeks left. He's been talking about you a lot, saying he made a mistake all those years ago. He wants to apologize." The irony wasn't lost on me. The man who'd decided I wasn't worth raising because girls were too complicated now wanted forgiveness because he was facing his own mortality. "And Jake?" I asked, my heart pounding. How is he?" There was a pause. Jacob is doing well. He's married, has two beautiful children. He's a successful engineer. He lives about an hour away from us. An hour away. My brother had been living an hour away from our grandparents all these years, probably visiting them regularly, probably having family dinners and holidays with them while I was bouncing between foster homes and working multiple jobs just to survive. Does he know you're calling me? I asked. Another pause. Yes, we discussed it as a family. As a family. The words hit me like a physical blow. They were a family. Grandparents, Jake, his wife, his children, and I was just a footnote, a loose end they wanted to tie up before Grandpa Frank died. The reunion that broke my heart. Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet them. I told myself I was doing it for closure, to finally get answers to the questions that had haunted me for 2 decades. I drove to their house on a Saturday afternoon, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. It was a nice suburban home with a well-maintained lawn and flower beds, the kind of stable, loving environment I dreamed of as a child. Grandma Rose answered the door, and for a moment, we just stared at each other. She looked exactly like I remembered, just older and more fragile. "Sarah," she whispered, and I thought I saw tears in her eyes. "You look so much like your mother." I followed her into the living room, where Grandpa Frank was sitting in a recliner, connected to an oxygen tank. He looked frail and tired, nothing like the stern man who decided my fate all those years ago. But what broke my heart was seeing Jake. My brother, who'd been 10 years old when I last saw him, was now 32, tall and handsome, with kind eyes just like our dad's. He stood up when I entered the room, and for a moment, neither of us knew what to do. "Sarah," he said softly, and his voice was deeper now, but I could still hear echoes of the boy who'd promised to come back for me. I wanted to run to him, to hug him, to cry, and tell him how much I'd missed him, but something in his posture, something guarded in his expression, stopped me. "Hi, Jake," I said instead, staying near the doorway. The next hour was surreal. Grandpa Frank apologized, his voice weak but sincere. He said he'd made a terrible mistake, that he'd let fear and old-fashioned thinking cloud his judgment. He said he'd regretted it for years, but hadn't known how to fix it. Grandma Rose cried and said she'd thought about me often, wondered how I was doing. She said they'd tried to find me a few times over the years, but the foster system was complicated, and they didn't push hard enough. Through it all, Jake sat quietly, barely looking at me. When our grandparents finished their apologies, I finally asked the question that had been burning in my chest. "Jake, why didn't you ever try to contact me? You promised you'd come back for me." He looked uncomfortable, glancing at our grandparents before meeting my eyes. "I did try at first," he said slowly. "But Grandma and Grandpa, they explained that it would be better for both of us to move forward. They said constantly looking backward would just cause more pain." "So you just forgot about me?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't forget," he said quickly. "But Sarah, I was just a kid too, and they gave me such a good life. They put me through college, helped me get established in my career. They've been amazing grandparents to my children." The words hung in the air between us. He was explaining why he'd chosen them over me, why he'd let our relationship disappear, why he'd built a family that didn't include me. The final betrayal. I thought the reunion might be the beginning of rebuilding our relationship. I was wrong. Over the next few weeks, as Grandpa Frank's condition worsened, I tried to connect with Jake. I reached out, suggesting we grab coffee or dinner, maybe get to know each other again as adults. His responses were polite but distant. He was busy with work, with his kids' activities, with spending time with our dying grandfather. There was always an excuse. The final blow came at Grandpa Frank's funeral 2 weeks later. I sat in the back of the church, watching Jake deliver a beautiful eulogy about what a wonderful grandfather Frank had been, how he'd been a father figure after our parents died, how he'd shaped Jake into the man he'd become. There was no mention of me, no acknowledgement of the choice our grandfather had made 20 years ago, no recognition that his wonderful grandfather had abandoned his own granddaughter to the foster system. After the service, I approached Jake at the reception. "That was a beautiful speech," I said. "Thank you," he replied. But he seemed uncomfortable. "Jake, I was hoping maybe now that we've reconnected, we could—" "Sarah," he interrupted gently, "I need to be honest with you. Grandma Rose is struggling with grief right now, and my family, we have our routine, our traditions. I don't think it would be good for anyone to try to force something that might disrupt the stability we've built." I stared at him, not believing what I was hearing. "Are you saying you don't want a relationship with me?" He sighed, looking genuinely pained. "I'm saying that sometimes it's better to let the past stay in the past. We're different people now, Sarah. We've lived completely different lives. Because they chose to give you opportunities they denied me," I said, my voice rising slightly. "And I'm grateful for that," he said firmly. "I won't apologize for the life they gave me or for protecting the family I have now." That's when I realized the truth. Jake hadn't been looking for me all these years because he didn't want to find me. He'd built a perfect life with our grandparents, the people who'd abandoned me, and I was just an uncomfortable reminder of the choice they'd made. He'd chosen them over me, just like they'd chosen him over me 20 years ago. Where I am now. That was 3 months ago. I haven't spoken to Jake or Grandma Rose since the funeral, and I don't plan to. I keep thinking about that 10-year-old boy who promised he'd come back for me, who cried when they took him away, who swore we'd stick together no matter what. That boy grew up and became a man who decided his comfortable life was more important than his sister who'd been left behind. I understand why he made that choice. I even understand why our grandparents made their choice 20 years ago. But understanding doesn't make it hurt less. The hardest part is grieving not just for the brother I lost, but for the relationship I thought we might rebuild. For 20 years, I held on to this fantasy that Jake was out there somewhere, thinking about me, missing me. The reality is that he moved on, created a new family, and I was just a painful memory he preferred to leave buried. I'm telling this story because I need people to understand that family isn't just about blood. It's about choice, about showing up, about fighting for each other when things get hard. My grandparents and my brother chose the easy path, and I was the collateral damage. But I survived. I built a life for myself without them, and I'll continue to thrive without them. I have friends who are more family to me than my actual relatives ever were. I have colleagues who respect and value me. I have a career helping children who've been forgotten by their families, just like I was. Some days I still miss the brother I thought I had, but I'm learning to grieve him like I grieved our parents, as someone who's gone forever, not someone who might come back. If you're watching this and you've been abandoned by family, I want you to know that you're not alone. It's not your fault that they couldn't see your worth. You deserve people who will choose you, who will fight for you, who will stick by you when things get complicated. And if you're someone who's had to make difficult choices about family, I hope you'll think about the people you're leaving behind. Because 20 years later, when you want to apologize, it might be too late. The damage might be too deep to heal. That's my story. A dying grandfather tried to apologize after abandoning me for 20 years, but my brother chose their side over mine. And honestly, I'm done trying to force people to love me who've already decided I'm not worth the effort. Thanks for listening. Leave your thoughts in the comments, but please be kind. This is already the hardest thing I've ever shared, and I'm still healing from it all. Until next time, remember that you are worthy of love, even when your own family can't see it. End of video.